And I stumbled across this whole philosophy of cash flow investing. If you could turn your properties into cash flow properties, then you're more likely to be able to hold them. And that was where it really shifted for me.
This is Property Investory, where we talk to successful property investors, find out more about their stories, mindset, and strategy. I'm Tyrone Shum, and in this episode, we chat to Peak Property Group's Michael Tiemens about his property investing journey and his key philosophies about cash flow investing. So, to begin with, what does a day in the life of Michael Tiemens look like?
We basically specialise in boutique property developments in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne. And I specialise also in coaching and speaking other property investors on how they can get started in the property market as well. Most of my days are spent working on our own projects, and then a lot of the rest of the day is spent on helping other students through coaching calls or travelling interstate speaking at a different event.
Speaking in seminars for I Love Real Estate, he says that there are many inspiring stories and opportunities available for those looking to kickstart their property investment portfolios.
Look, I speak on a number of different topics, but all property-centric. So I'm affiliated with the I Love Real Estate community that's headed up by Dimpner Boholt, and very privileged to work with a number of different speakers on a national stage, which is a great opportunity. And really, look, we're speaking to property investors all around the country on how they can really manufacture growth in their property portfolios, how they can add properties to their portfolios, and how they can really derive cash flow out of their properties too, to support them and to really replace their income, essentially.
Educating yourself is one of the most significant aspects of becoming a property investor. Tiemens explains there are many free workshops, educational programs, coaches and strategists inside the I Love Real Estate community, which are great resources for insight into the property investing world.
Dimpner's one of these people that goes around the country and runs a lot of free workshops as well. And, she's giving away a lot of information at those free one-day workshops, not just on property investing, but asset protection, tax structuring, how you can, again, build cash flow into your portfolios to support your lifestyle, how you can go out and manufacture growth in properties too. So, it's all wrapped up in a lot of education, but also a lot of mindset and personal development skills as well, I guess, which is pretty cool. And then, we've got a lot of members around the country as well that come on, they join the educational programs. They can really see that there's a lot of benefit in getting educated in property before they actually go out and take the plunge and make an investment. And then there's also a lot of people that come and join the education because they may have already had a go at investing themselves and made some mistakes along the way. They might be stuck. They might be in a position where they can't really move forward. So they're looking for avenues and they're looking for different pathways that they can get themselves out of that position. So a lot of the time, students will come on board. We're working with those students. We're coaching those students. We're helping them, establish and extract out what are their goals. What are they really trying to achieve by investing in property? And then we help them by building a bridge, basically. So we'll develop a plan for them. We'll be able to establish, where they're at right now, where they're looking to get to, and what they can do from a property perspective to really get there. And a lot of the time, there's fixing stuff up in the portfolio. A lot of the time it's looking at restructuring, it's, looking at refinancing. We've got a lot of great professionals as part of the community too. We've got finance strategists, we've got accountants, we've got solicitors. So there's so many people that are involved in this community that can help people ultimately get to where they need to be.
As a property investor, the coach and keynote speaker describes himself as an active, creative person, preferring to add value to his portfolio through things such as renovations and property development.
Mate, I would say I'm probably more on the creative side. I like to see and use property as a way in which I can, come from a different angle. I'm not sort of the traditional type of property investor that just goes out and buys properties to hold them in the portfolio. I think that as a strategy, I think that's probably a little bit flawed and probably a bit too slow for my liking. I'm more on the fast tracking fast tracking growth side of things. So we'll get in, we'll negotiate a creative type of deal. We'll tend to add value in ways that we can, whether it be through renovation or subdivision, property development, building, construction. We do a lot of commercial stuff these days as well. So, I always use the philosophy that you've got to be able to see what isn't there and then bring it into existence. And if you can do that, effectively you're going out there and you're adding your own value to the marketplace, which in turn you'll normally profit out of if you're diligent enough. So, I'd say I'm probably more on the creative side, probably prepared to take a little bit more risk and be a little bit more courageous than just the sort of buy and hold strategy. But yeah, it keeps things interesting.
Having had some personal setbacks in his life, Tiemens grew up with a solid foundation and frame of mind which enabled him to grow as a person. In turn, his hardships have paved the way towards some amazing opportunities and to embark on his property investment journey.
Yeah, so born and bred in Melbourne. Couldn't consider myself ever leaving, I don't think. I love it too much. Love the culture in Melbourne. But, look, if I cast my mind back, to where my career, I guess, sort of started off. I'm 15 years old and I started my first business called Mixed Tanks, and I effectively started to put together these fish tanks, and I'd go around to local businesses in the area and I'd convince them that it was a good idea to have these fish tanks in their waiting rooms and their foyers, to keep their customers entertained. So, me and my dad would build these fish tanks. I'd go and put them in these businesses, and then they'd pay me $25 a week to rent a fish tank, and I'd go and clean it every couple of weeks. And it turned out to be a great little business, and at the time I was doing a little bit of football umpiring as well, in the AFL, the Australian Football League, and making pretty good money, and it was all going pretty well. And a couple of years later on, I was sort of put in a position where my life kind of changed. I still remember it very clearly, actually. It was my parents' 20th wedding anniversary, and they'd been out that morning, hot air ballooning and having a nice champagne breakfast and all of that, and they'd come home. And Dad had gone out that day to sort of run a few errands with the business and that kind of thing. And then later that day, I was sitting on the couch. It was about 5:00 in the afternoon, and I was there with my two younger sisters. And Mum sort of walked in the back door, and she's got this confused look on her face, and she says, "I've got the police here, and they're telling me that Dad's gone." I said, got up off the couch and looked at her. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" So I ran outside and approached this policeman. I said, "Mate, what is this? Some kind of prank? Is it a joke? What's going on?" And he sat me down and he said, "Mate, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but your old man's about a minute up the road and he's passed away." And in that moment, everything really shifted for me. Everything really changed. I was kind of presented with a choice about who I was going to be from there on in, and I decided to sort of step up and become a leader in my own life and a leader in my family's life and those around me as well. And I guess that's where it all really sort of started to change. And from there, I landed a dream job working for the Hawthorn Footy Club a couple of weeks later. And I was a big Hawks fan, so it came at a great time. I was very much looking for mentorship. I was looking for guidance, and I was put in an environment where I had access to some of the best possible people, particularly in the state. Guys like the founder of Flight Centre, Jeff Harris, and the CEO of L'Oreal, Mark Tucker, and Jeff Kennett. I used to sit next to Jeff Kennett at a finance committee meeting every month, not to mention, the staff and the players and CEO and that kind of thing too. So, I'd constantly be going to these people asking them, how can I get ahead financially? How can I add value to my family and to my life? And they'd sort of send me off. They say, you need to learn about the stock market. You need to go and invest in shares. So I'd go off and I'd invest in some shares and I'd make a bit of money and it was going okay. And I'd be like, it's still not enough. I still need to, do more. So I go back to them, like, what else can I do? Where else can I make some more money? And like, we need to learn about property. And that's where I sort of looked at it and I said, okay, well, where do I go to learn about property? And that's when my mum and we actually started to go along to some seminars. So we started to go to some seminars. We started to learn about, the different types of styles of investing and, the different types of strategies you could do. And we started to go out there and we started to apply these strategies and, make a bit of money. We were doing pretty well. In some cases, we even lost a little bit of money. And I was still frustrated. I was still confused because I was like, I'm reading books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and they're talking about how you can build wealth and you can accumulate mass portfolios and this kind of thing. And I couldn't see it. I couldn't work out how they were doing it. And it actually wasn't until I went along to a particular event, an I Love Real Estate event with Dimner. I met Dimner, it was about 4.5 years ago, and I stumbled across this whole philosophy of cash flow investing. If you could turn your properties into cash flow properties, then you're more likely to be able to hold them. And that was where it really shifted for me, because I was using all of the same strategies, manufacturing growth, adding growth to properties, that kind of thing. But then I was also adding in cash flow strategies, which meant that we could hold them in our portfolio. And that's where our wealth really started to grow. So from there, we started to really, increase the level of deals that we were doing at any one time. We started to grow into bigger areas of property investing. We started to do more commercial type deals. We started to do property developments. We started to, build houses that were highly yielding type houses as well. And that's where it all sort of really started to take off. And then the last 4 years have just been, an immense journey for me, particularly personal growth. Now I'm speaking, now I'm coaching other people, I'm really helping other people achieve their goals as well.
It is clear that his parents have had an influence on his career and property investing journey. They were both keen business owners who also happened to be looking at investing in property before Tiemens' father's untimely passing.
My parents were always business owners. So, I grew up seeing them create businesses, sell businesses. I was working in those businesses. I'd start, earning pocket money, from earning businesses. From working in those businesses. So I guess there was always that sort of inspiration and empowerment from an early age to do more. But they were also taking me to, different types of events, like their own business events. Like, I remember going to a Brad Sugar's action business coaching event, when I was like 15, 16 years old, right, to learn, because they were getting coaching in their own businesses. So they were always very ambitious as people, and I think that probably rubbed off on me in a big way, and has very much created the DNA that I've got. They did everything from packaging up chicken manure and selling it at service stations to, creating a hedging business where they'd grow, 1 metre long instant hedges that you could literally just dig a trench in your front garden and drop a hedge in, and you've got that established look. They did a lot of different things. They were also sort of starting to embark on that journey of property investing just before Dad passed away. So I guess it took Mum a little while to get back up on her feet before she could kind of look at that again. But I kind of stood in my dad's place, when that all happened, and it's a pity because he came from a building background. He would have been great to have as part of our business today. I look at what we're doing, and he'd be thriving in this type of environment. But I guess there's still a lot of him that's part of what we do and part of what drives us as well. To kind of live on his legacy and very much of what was passed on to me.
Getting started in property investments taught Tiemens a great deal through first-hand experience. Moving from investing in negatively geared properties to relocating a Melbourne granny flat to Bonnie Doon, his knowledge of property investing has expanded over time.
We actually got started by getting a couple of negative geared properties and held those for about 12 months before we realised, hang on a minute, these aren't actually doing too much for our situation. While they were still in good areas that, were expected to get good capital growth, they were still costing us like $9,000, $10,000 each per year, which was physically coming out in cash. It might look great for tax purposes and negative gearing purposes, but at the end of the day, it wasn't really getting us into the position that we knew we had to be in to change our lives. So after the 12 months passed on, we ended up selling those. We ended up coming out about break even. And then we moved into a more manufactured growth strategy where we actually bought a farm. And we bought a farm because it was pretty much all that we knew. we sort of grew up on a farm, or I grew up on a farm, and we owned a farm, and we knew and we could see where we could add value in those areas on this particular farm. So we did that. We ended up selling it about 18 months later and made a bit of money, and then went back and started doing more sort of small cosmetic renovations, and even did a tiny little project where I shifted a granny flat from Melbourne, one of the suburbs in Melbourne, all the way up to a holiday park in Bonnie Doon. Right, so I went and met the owner of this holiday park, and I said, "Man, I want to get some land is there any land that you can give me? He said, well, most people in here, they kind of hire or lease a site. You've got 120 square meters, you pay $3,000 per year and it's yours for the year, right? I said, okay, well, that sounds pretty good. How would you feel if I was to bring up this old granny flat and I'll do a renovation to it and I'll make it look great? And, we'll either hold on to it or look at selling it at the end. He said, well, give us a bit of an idea in terms of what you've got in mind. So I sent him through some photos. He was pretty happy. He said, yep, look, I'm okay with that. So I ended up paying about $11,000, got this granny flat on the back of a truck and took it all the way up to Bonnydoon. It was exciting, but it was pretty hard work. I mean, traveling 2.5 hours to get there every weekend just to do this renovation was pretty tough. But it was certainly worthwhile and very rewarding in the end. I mean, look, the whole deal I think cost us about $50,000. We ended up selling it for about 80 or 85,000. Took a nice little profit, but it was more so the learning experiences that I took out of that. And I managed that. I was managing the tradespeople. The builder came in. Building consultants, building surveyor, had to get the building permit, all of that kind of stuff. Energy ratings. So it taught me a lot in the process, and I got to earn a bit of money, by doing it, which also helped. But from then, it really allowed us to start to scale and start to grow as investors. And that's where we moved on to, doing bigger house relocations, to regional areas at the time, because that's all we could afford. And then eventually stepping up to do property developments. Now we've done, I don't even know how many property developments that we've done. We've got 7 or 8 on the go at any one time in various different stages now. We're doing commercial developments where we're knocking over retail shops, rebuilding the shops, and building micro apartments above. We're building apartments above. We do a lot in the way of rooming houses as well, so multiple income strategies. So I guess the experience is sort of very vast now, where we've done pretty much most of the strategies out there. But yeah, it's been really good, and that first little deal and the first few deals to get us going created a pretty strong foundation.
As it is with many cases, investing in property hasn't always been a bed of roses for Tiemens. His experience with the wrong builder has taught him to be cautious of who he hires and to always choose integrity and honesty over cheap labour.
Our first probably like our first property development, where we were building some townhouses, and the deal had been going pretty well all the way through council, getting permits and getting all the working drawings and engineering done and everything like that. Where the deal started to really hurt was I ended up engaging the wrong builder. It came down to 2 guys. I'd managed the tendering process really well, and I chose the wrong guy based on price more than probably reputation and integrity. And for me at the time, I mean, it was hard because I'd sort of done a lot of the checks. I'd done a lot of the main sort of things that I could think of, but probably the areas that I skipped over were talking to current clients and investigating behind the scenes about what was going on with these current projects. So, I just took for granted that I'd spoken to people I'd worked with in the past and they were happy. We'd seen some of the previous work and it looked quite good. The quality of workmanship was good. But that doesn't equate for much in terms of the current position that builder might be going through. And, when it comes to building, builders rely on cash flow. Builders rely on oxygen coming into their business so that they can continually fund the next project. They're always one stage payment behind. And this particular builder had got himself in a bit of a bind with cash flow, and he was underquoting projects. He'd come in probably underquoted this project that we were doing. And that was probably the reason in the end that I went with him, because he just came in that little bit cheaper. But I still remember it very clearly. I walked onto site one day and he'd spent 6 months since we'd signed the building contract stuffing around, me having to chase him, me having to issue, notices on him, breach notices from the contract and all of that kind of thing. And I walked in on site one day and it was 6 months down the track, and I had to meet him on there, and he'd hardly done any work up until that point, and I was so frustrated. But the night before, I'd got a call from one of his existing clients who was just giving me the heads up that he was in some severe trouble financially. So you can imagine how I'm feeling. Like, I've got a bank loan for the construction of these townhouses. We're pretty much getting towards the back end. I've got purchases that, we're expecting to be moving in before Christmas, and we're kind of at the end of November and we've hardly got out of the ground. So there's all this pressure on me to kind of, create a good result out of this. And I've got this guy who's just dragging the ball and chain, really sort of running the deal into the ground. And at the time, I'm happy to admit, and probably ashamed that I was in that position, that we were too far stretched, we were over leveraged, our debt level was far too high for, probably where our equity was. So it meant that, really I was in a vulnerable position, and it was all at the mercy of this guy. So, I had to meet him on site that morning, and I knew very well that, it was going to get ugly from that point on, because I was going to do everything in my power to try and get out of the contract. And, in a period of time where you're going into Christmas, that can be quite a challenging sort of thing, because there's not much activity happening on site. Most people are expecting for payments to come through so that they can go, on holidays and all of that kind of thing. And I ended up having to really stretch that out over, sort of 2 or 3 months before he would actually let me out of the contract. And it didn't even get to the point where we mutually agreed. I had to take him to VCAT, and it was only that I had a super, super red hot lawyer working on my side that, just didn't like this guy, because of his bullying strategies and his bullying tactics. And it was a really horrible situation. And I remember just in that moment, just remembering that I would never, ever be here again. I would never, ever let someone pull the wool over my eyes, and that I would just be so much more diligent in who we worked with and how we picked them, and, the background checks that we did on them. So, touch wood, we haven't been through anything like that ever again. And that we don't. But yeah, mate, it was very challenging. It was a tricky time, but I know as a person and, as a business owner and as an investor, that was my growth opportunity. There were moments where I was literally weeping, at night, going, how am I going to get out of this? I've got the bank breathing down my neck. They're struggling to, see how I can come out of this alive. Fortunately for me, I went back to the previous builder who it boiled down to those last two, and he came through. He really helped us out. I think from him coming on site once we terminated the old building contract to finishing to practical completion was like 2 months. This guy just smashed it. And, young guy, like super hungry, super driven, doing heaps of stuff in the area. And it was just such a blessing to work with someone like that and to see, the vast differences between, people in the industry. And I just remember thinking, like, you've just got to have good people in your team. You've just got to be so cautious with who you work with, but just pick people that you enjoy working with, that have got integrity, that show honesty, that show discipline, that are there to really help push you forward as well, not just the other way around.
However, he will always remember the moment when everything fell into place, saying the cash flow strategies he learned at the beginning of his property investing journey made a profound impact on how he manages his portfolio.
That story I shared before, where I was kind of at that event and I was introduced to these cash flow strategies. When I look back in time, that's probably been the biggest thing that has made the biggest difference, because it's allowed us to sort of hold properties. So not only can we create that little bit of profit, by adding strategy or by adding value, but now we get to continually, add profit to the bottom line because the market, is growing at the same rate. So, we're getting the double-edged sword, capital growth and manufactured growth and cash flow.
With many different options available to encourage wealth creation, Tiemens is excited about the crowdfunding financing platform as a means to support investors who are struggling to get started in a troubled economy.
The largest single thing that I'm excited about in property investment is crowdfunding for property development. And the reason I say that is because there's so much energy and discussion and argument around property and housing affordability at the moment. I look at the median house price for Melbourne and it's like 830,000, 850,000. It's like, how on earth can young people and not just young people, but older people as well get into the market if, they're having to pay these large amounts for property? If you think about that, if you need to put up a 20% deposit for even a $500,000 property, you're going to need the best part of $100,000. You're going to have stamp duty. You're going to have to pay your conveyancing. You're going to have building and pest inspections. So, you're in it for 130 grand of your own money. Then you've got to pay the interest on a $400,000 loan. It's just unreasonable for people to, save that much of a deposit if you're earning, the average Australian wage, which, $65,000, $70,000, $75,000 a year. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, where else can people go to get returns to help build that deposit quicker? Is the bank giving it to them? No, the bank's not giving them a good interest rate. Can they go and get it from a managed fund? Yeah, they can get it from a managed fund. But, is it likely that the managed fund always performs? Not always. Is the stock market, a good place to go to invest your savings to really accelerate your deposit? Can be, in the right area, but it's certainly volatile. It fluctuates a lot. So I'm looking at this going, crowdfunding for property development. Like, imagine if you could get into a property development where, the developer's already got the development approval. The developer's already got the building, approval in place. He's already got the building contract. And then you've got a valuation coming in for the end sale price, or maybe even the end product's already been sold off the plan. If you could put in your money and get a half decent return and have it come back to you within the space of, 6 months, 8 months, I think that's a great way for someone to accelerate their deposit, for them to be able to go and get into a property themselves. So this is an area where we're starting to spend a lot more time and energy. We're going to be launching a campaign in July, which will be for exactly that, a development that we've already got approved. We've already mitigated the risk as much as possible. But if we can go out there and raise a small amount of money to do the build and then show people that this is an effective way for you to invest, a portion of your savings or some of your savings or all of your savings, then, that's going to be a great thing, I think, for the industry and for where financing is at as well. Financing is a very challenging beast at the moment. We've got APRA leaning in, sort of, pushing down their weight on the banks. The banks are increasing rates. The oxygen supply in the market being credit, that's starting to be pulled out. So, what does that mean for the overall market? So I think it's going to turn into a case of, having to go to other sources and other places to look for it. So, there's very much a culture of this share economy with, technology and technology meshing with traditional industry, particularly property. And, when you look at things like Uber, when you look at Airbnb, Airbnb, booking.com, stays.com, all of that sort of, this is the reason why I think it's the best time to be an investor in history right now, because you can be in control as much as you want. You can leverage off technology. You can create cash flow. You can get a good yield. It's just a terrific time to be in the market. So I think that's really, really cool. I think that's going to be a big thing that's coming that we really haven't even scratched the surface on yet. There's a lot of education that needs to happen on this particular topic. But, we want to be there front and center and really leading the charge with it. And I think that there's going to be a great opportunity there for a lot of people to come on board.
Tiemens believes that investing into property is not something to take lightly, and it was a big decision for him when he initially started. In some ways, this held him back.
I think a lot of uncertainty about what to do next can hold people back, and it was probably certainly a big thing that was limiting me and my decisions, because when you don't have knowledge, you're not sure about where to go. And property is one of these assets that you can't just get in lightly. If you want to go into a property or a property development, it's most likely that you're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars, tens of thousands at least. So you're making big decisions, and then you're also leveraging debt to do that. Now, that's all well and good if I think you're adding value to the property, particularly something that's already established that you're not having to knock over, or you're not having to go to the market and sell, or that kind of thing. But there are some strategies that are a little bit riskier than others. So for me, it was more about, look, I just need to get skilled up. I just need to learn. I need to get myself in an environment where, I'm surrounded by successful people. I'm going and listening to what these people are doing. I'm learning about their strategies. I'm learning their systems. And I just need to take that and implement it for myself.
When he began to invest in property development, there was a shift in his mindset, which took him from placing reliance on his consultants to actively researching and taking control of the projects.
Probably one of the mistakes that I made there is that I put too much reliance on my consultants. People like, an architect and a designer, thinking that because they're the professionals in their own field, that they would kind of look after that part of the project. But what I was really overlooking and what I was missing is that I needed to pretty much have a handle and a grasp on everything that they were doing. Because if they were going and designing something that, wasn't suited to the area, or if they were designing something that was going to cost too much to build, and I wasn't pulling them up on that, then I wasn't really going to find out until it actually hurt me later down the track. So I guess, what I learned through that first development was that I can't just be someone who's passively, actively investing, if that kind of makes sense. If I'm just sort of sitting here expecting that it's all going to happen simply because I'm engaging those people. I had to be someone who was pretty much immersed in the project, that was really taking control and really leading from the front, showing them exactly what I wanted, researching the market, pulling it apart, peeling back all the layers, saying, what's the stuff that's selling best? Do I need to have a double car garage? What type of driveway does it need to be? Does it need to be an exposed aggregate driveway? Does it need a coloured concrete driveway? Does it need to be a plain concrete driveway? What type of landscaping do I need to be doing? What type of cladding can I be using on the buildings? Do I need to have the complexity in the wall articulation, all of that kind of stuff? So now when we design something, to build, we're looking at it from every single facet. We're always looking at how can we create a great product that someone's going to love, that's also going to, match where our budget is, rather than just, pray and hope for the best once the builders come along and start handing us prices. So that was a big mindset shift for me when it came to the property specific stuff, that, I just had to be someone who had my finger on the pulse and was just sort of watching every stage, on the way through. And, now I'm at a stage where I'm actually teaching other people in our business to do that, so that, I'm kind of managing them while they're managing our projects. So, we've been able to grow and take it to another level as well.
In conditioning his mindset via his chosen courses and mentors, Tiemens considers himself to be an active learner, preferring to educate himself, apply his knowledge to projects, and then witness the fruits of his labour.
I've always had a lot of coaches. I've always, done a lot of courses. I've spent, so much money on self-education courses, because, I know that I'm actually, not just sitting there learning something, but I'm paying for someone else's mistakes. I'm paying for someone else's experiences. I'm basically paying for, their experience and their history condensed down into, what might be 15, 20 years of experience into like a short course, So I can always see a lot of value in, going and doing a program. So whether it be, understanding how property development works and going and paying, for a property development course, or going and paying for a commercial investing course, it doesn't really matter. I've always kind of just seen, what's the education? How can I get involved in it? And, I'll just pay it, because I think it's just, you can never have enough education. Education's a journey. It's not a destination. The biggest difference, I think, self-education's made for me in respect to, academic education, like university. I gave university a crack. I was doing a Bachelor of Commerce, and it was going okay. I wasn't even paying for it. I mean, Hawthorn Footy Club were paying for it at the time, because, they could see what it was going to do for me in their business. But it just didn't gel with me. I was learning the information, but I couldn't understand how it actually related to me. And I felt like it was more about memory than it was really about anything else. How much could I retain and learn to then do well in the exam? But when I started to get involved in more self-education, I was seeing a big difference it was making in my life, because I was going out there and I was applying it, and I could effectively see the results then and there. So for me, it's always been about how can I learn from other people? How can I learn from their mistakes? And how can I get coached so that someone else can stretch me, so they can push me outside of my comfort zone, so that I can, lean into the discomfort. And that's ultimately what a coach is there for, right?
In addition to this proactive business mindset, he has also learnt from his mentor's advice on prioritising his time in order to extract more value from his efforts.
One of my mentors said to me once, if you're so busy being busy in business, but you're not making any money, What are you so busy doing? And that really got me thinking about, where am I spending my time? Do I spend my time on my highest valued activities, which for me are, putting deals together and going out there and seeking investors to come on board with our projects, having conversations, coaching other students, all of that kind of stuff. So, it's kind of like the old adage, do you go and clean up your desk and make sure everything's pretty and nice before you actually pick up the phone and start making proper phone calls and start to work on, the highest priority, goals on your list? Or are you someone who just kind of jumps straight into it and is more of the productive type? So I guess I ask myself that question a lot, in property and business and, anything that I do, is that, well, if I'm just being busy running around like a headless chook, am I actually really achieving anything? Am I really producing any type of result?
Tiemens' strategy begins with finding the right location to begin developing. This means researching all the relevant characteristics of the area.
Our strategy begins with picking an area. So I think for any investor that is looking to invest for just growth, or whether it be for manufactured growth or for cash flow, is making sure that you're in the right location. So some of the things that we do if we're moving into a new area is that we'll begin by looking at the fundamentals. So the fundamentals being, where is their infrastructure planning? Is there any sort of scheduled works to happen? Are they putting in new shopping centres? Is there, what's its proximity like to major arterials? How is its positioning to hospitals and schools and TAFEs and universities, all of that kind of thing? What's the public transport like? How far away is it from public transport? Is there train and rail, or is it just bus? We look at all of that. So we look at the characteristics of an area. So to put it into perspective, if we're looking at, say, 5 areas that are all based on our price point, so if we know our price point is $500,000 buy-in and we're looking at the median, which is $500,000, we'll then shortlist those properties by doing the characteristics research. Then effectively what we're doing is we're looking at, where can we get the most uplift? So we've got to make sure that the strategy actually works in that particular suburb. So then we'll go out and we'll start to pick apart, what are things selling for? What's the end product selling for? What can we buy it for? We'll run it through our feasibility, make sure that it stacks up numbers-wise. And we'll go and meet with, our consultants, make sure that our consultants are familiar with the area. They understand all the council regulations, state regulations, what we can and can't do. And then from there, we'll then start to get out and build relationships to go and find sites.
When looking to increase cash flow and also add value to property, Tiemens seeks a creative strategy dependent on the type of property he's working with.
It really depends if you're looking at residential property or if you're looking at commercial property, because the two are vastly different. If it's residential property, we're looking for, how can we either transform a property, or how can we build a property which is going to serve a purpose for multiple occupancy. So we're always looking for, how can we bring in different revenue streams than just the traditional sort of rent out the house to, a family or whatever, or what have you. With commercial, we're always looking for yield. So we're looking for, strong tenancies, strong leases, good yields, opportunities where we can increase the yield, through various different strategies as well. And then, also with adding improvements and developing the property too, that can always increase the yield. Every element of a deal that we do always has some property development potential, being that we are going through the council planning process. We are building and constructing something new. So there may be elements of where we're keeping the existing, what's already there, and then adding to it.
Talking about personal habits, Tiemens has a cookie-cutter system for implementing his strategy. He also combines personal and professional growth through maintaining a healthy routine and listening to a wide range of material.
So I like routine. I think routine's important. I generally wake up and have the same thing for breakfast, and I'll always have a coffee in the morning and that kind of thing. Routine, I guess, creates good habits, and good habits create success. But it's always looking at, rinse and repeat. So I'd much prefer to have, a cookie cutter system than, be jumping around all the time to a different place and a different strategy and that kind of thing. So, with our property investing, we don't don't tend to leave our backyard. I don't really have to drive any more than a 10 or 15 kilometre radius to get to a project. So that sort of stuff's important. I'm all about, spending as much time as I possibly can close to home because, like I mentioned before, I am traveling, I am speaking. So when I am here, I just want to be here. I don't want to be spending too much time traveling away. But yeah, in terms of habits, I would say, doing most of the things the same every day. There's stuff like meditation that I do, exercising 3-4 times a week. I think it's important to keep the mind healthy, and even listening to podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time, and I'm constantly just filling my mind up with new ideas, new information, listening to podcasts in different industries, whether it be business or marketing or health, because a lot of what people will discuss in other industries can be applied to your industry. So I think that that's an important part to that too, in terms of not just looking at what everyone else is doing in your industry, but where can you get that edge? How could you be doing something different?
He shares some of the podcasts that he engages with, such as those relating to marketing and business.
I listen to the Mark Boris show. I like the Mark Boris show. It's some interesting people on that one. Big Marketing Small Business, Timbo Reid. I like that one.
Yep, good old Timbo. He's awesome.
I don't mind getting into the odd Nathan Latka episode as well, where he's just drilling some business owner. I think they're pretty good as well. But yeah, I've got a few in the library.
Tiemens has taken knowledge from these resources and applied it to his development projects, which has helped him to think outside the box.
It's about taking a different approach. So particularly in marketing, with property, it's important to stand out, because if you've just got something that everyone else is offering, then, where's your point of difference? So I guess we probably take a bit more of an active approach, even down to how we contact property owners about, what services we can offer and how we can help them create value, in their own properties, rather than sort of just waiting for a property to come onto the market. We'll actually get out there and be very deliberate about who we target, why we're targeting them, how we can help them. And, even, when we're selling the end product, we're looking for ways that we can be different. So we'll get out and we'll join, business networks, and we'll market through, Chamber of Commerce's, and we'll go out and we'll, speak to, if it's commercial, we'll go out there and actually hit the footpath and, speak to people in the street, that kind of stuff, just to generate a different type of approach. Like if we've got a vacant commercial property, I want to know what the community wants or what they feel like it should be, offered there, so that I can actually then go out and start to approach those business owners to say, hey, look, we've got a space here in this strip or in this suburb. We've gone out, we've spoken to a lot of people in the community, we're part of their business network. This is what they're saying the demand is. This is what they're coming back to us, really suggesting that that's what they need. So it's kind of taking a different approach, as opposed to just listing the property for lease or for sale and expecting that buyers and tenants are going to roll up and want to get into our property. So it just gets you to think a little differently, I guess.
If you'd like to connect with Tiemens, you can do so via...
And anyone can connect with me on Facebook or LinkedIn. My last name's Tiemens, Tiemens. Anyone who wants to come along and learn about, our strategies and the ways in which we can help them with property investing can go to iloverealestate.tv. And anyone who's looking to, engage with me or my business can go to michaeltiemens.com.au, and we've got a heap of information there that people can take away with them and continue on their journey, And any listeners out there that do listen to the podcast, we'd love to follow your own journeys and see how we might be able to help you in any way.
Thank you to Michael Tiemens, our guest on this episode of Property Investory. If you want to hear more about his journey, then visit our website at propertyinvestory.com. Simply type in the search bar Michael Tiemens and select that episode to learn more about his story.